Welcome to our AITA, where the married people decided to use the bride's wedding as premium coverage for their affair, and found out the hard way that a microphone, a projector screen, and resentment make a nearly religious combination. And before anyone starts with that speech about a wedding is not the place for drama, go ahead and say in the comments whether you would have handled it with class, therapy, and deep breathing, or whether you also would have chosen the express lane to chaos. Today's post is from Natalie. I'm a 31-year-old woman, and I married my husband Owen, 34, a little over a month ago. We've been together for 5 years. I have an older sister, Brooke, 36, married to Daniel, 38. They've been together for 12 years and have two daughters. Owen has an older brother, Grant, 37, married to Elise, 35. They've been married for 9 years and have a 6-year-old son. I know the title sounds absurd, but unfortunately it's accurate. During my wedding, I exposed an affair between my sister's husband and my husband's brother's wife. That resulted into almost immediate divorces, a full-blown family fight. My grandmother nearly fainting from dramatic overload, and half the family calling me a sociopath in a white dress. The worst part is that I didn't find out on the wedding day. I found out 2 weeks before. For context, my wedding was one of those huge family events that starts as a celebration and ends feeling like a military operation. 10 months of planning, way too many group chats, a budget that gave me heart palpitations, and relatives with opinions about everything, including the shape of the ice cubes. Brooke was my maid of honor. Daniel, her husband, offered to help with logistics because he works in corporate events and loves acting like the CEO of folding chairs. Elise also offered to help with a lot of things. She said she loved weddings. And to be fair, she really did seem to love them. Now, I realize maybe she loved weddings the way a thief loves an open window. In the months leading up to it, I noticed little strange things between Daniel and Elise. But every time my brain tried to connect the dots, my sense of reality shut the lights off. They finished each other's sentences. They disappeared at the same time during family gatherings. They had that annoying kind of inside joke that only happens when people spend way too much time together. At my engagement dinner, Brooke went looking for Daniel because he'd vanished for 20 minutes. And I found Elise coming back from the bathroom hallway at the same time, fixing her hair and laughing to herself. I thought it was weird. Very weird. But you know when the obvious explanation is so disgusting your mind chooses literally any other one. I preferred to think they were just two people who were inappropriately close. A spectacularly stupid intellectual choice, by the way, 2 weeks before the wedding. Brooke asked to borrow an old iPad of mine because her laptop had died, and she wanted to review the seating chart. That iPad, for some reason I didn't understand at the time, was logged into one of Daniel's messaging accounts. Probably because he'd used it months earlier to print game tickets for the girls, or something equally mundane, and had never logged out. I only realized it when a notification popped up on the screen, while I was sitting on my living room floor surrounded by napkin samples, trying to decide whether ivory was elegant or just white trying to feel important. The notification said, "Can't wait for the wedding. Everyone will be watching her. Nobody will notice us." It was for me, I swear. For 2 seconds I thought it was some vendor about entrance timing, parking, envelopes, escort cards, any random thing starting with E because the alternative was to Vile. Then curiosity won, and I opened it. It was not a vendor. It was Elise. And what I saw was not some ambiguous conversation that could be explained away with effort, faith, and a selective lobotomy. It was an affair. A full affair, old, organized, months of messages, photos, plans, complaints about their spouses, gross little jokes about how nobody suspected them because they were the reliable ones in the family, and the part that almost made me throw up into my own hypothetical dress was how many messages specifically talked about my wedding as an opportunity. They called the wedding weekend the perfect window. They had planned times to disappear during the rehearsal, during the reception, and even during the brunch the next day. My wedding had basically become Comic-Con for infidelity. There was a message from Daniel saying Brooke will be too busy being the bride's sister. Grant will be stuck with our son. It's the easiest week and we've ever had. And Elise replied, Natalie is literally paying for our cover. That gave me a level of rage I didn't even know my body was capable of producing. It wasn't just the cheating. It was the contempt, the arrogance, the way they were using the good people, Brooke and Grant, like furniture, and my wedding like some kind of free-themed hotel. I took pictures of everything. Because I know Daniel. If I confronted him without proof, he would lie with the calm of a man explaining tax deductions. He's the kind of person who lies while looking you dead in the eyes and then asked if you slept well. When no one got home, I showed him the messages. He went pale. Not pale in the skin, pale in the soul. That color people turn when they've just found out the universe has no brakes. Grant had always been his favorite brother. Brooke is basically his sister to at this point because we've been together for years. He read everything in silence, sat down on the floor, and said in the emptiest voice in the world, "We need to tell them now." I said I agreed. But I didn't know how to do that without blowing up everything before the ceremony. Brooke was my maid of honor. Grant was standing with Owen. Our families had already traveled, paid for hotels, arranged childcare, clothes, flights. And selfishly, maybe, I didn't want disgusting people to steal my entire wedding before I even got to walk down the aisle. I know that sounds cold. Maybe it is. But I had waited years for that day. And I couldn't stand the idea of waking up on my wedding day and watching my entire world get swallowed by a scandal I didn't create. Owen and I decided this. We would get through the ceremony, finish dinner, and then pull Brooke and Grant aside in private. Show them everything. and let them decide what to do. It was a horrible plan, but it seemed like the least devastating option available. Like choosing which leg to amputate first, the rehearsal was hell. Daniel was glowing. Elise was being far too helpful. Every time Brooke smiled at him, I wanted to throw a chair into the chandelier. Grant, poor guy, even said he was happy the family felt so united for the wedding. United, yes. United like a documentary-grade criminal ring on the morning of the ceremony. I spent the entire day feeling like I was wearing makeup over a fever. Brooke helped me get dressed. Elise pinned my veil. Yes, she put her hands on me, adjusted my veil, smiled, and told me I looked beautiful. All while she had been sleeping with my sister's husband for months. There is a kind of falseness so polished it starts to look like performance art. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Tragically beautiful. If it had at least been ugly, maybe I would have gotten some emotional compensation. But no, it was beautiful. I cried, Owen cried, the kids cried, even my dad cried. Which usually only happens with back pain and football. Brooke held my bouquet for a few minutes. Daniel smiled at the camera as if he weren't living a double life worthy of civil litigation. Elise clapped during our vows. Maybe she finds other people's faithfulness inspirational. During cocktail hour. The two of them disappeared for the first time. I noticed because by then I was already obsessed. Brooke commented that Daniel must be taking a work call. Grant laughed and said Elise was probably fixing her makeup because she never appeared in a picture, without reviewing her face like a public works project. 15 minutes later, they came back. Daniel with his tie crooked. Elise without lipstick. The universe practically screaming in my face, and I still held it together. I held it together because I wanted to finish dinner and tell them the right way. I held it together because Brooke looked happy. I held it together because Grant was playing with his son. I held it together because the civilized part of me still had a pulse. The civilized part died during the speeches. Daniel took the microphone first and gave a speech about love, commitment, and loyalty. Yes, loyalty. I know. It sounds like something written by a drunk screenwriter, but it happened. He said lasting marriages depend on choosing the same person every day, even when it's hard. Brooke cried. Cried from emotion. I saw my sister looking at that man like he was safe harbor. And at that exact moment something inside me snapped like a live wire dropped. In the pool water. Then Elise gave an impromptu speech about how families are built on trust and how lucky I was to be marrying into such a solid family. Such a solid family, of course. Solid as wet styrofoam right in the middle of that. Brooke came over and asked if I'd seen Daniel because he disappeared again. Almost at the same time, Grant asked Owen if Elise was with him because she wasn't answering. That was it. That exact combination of hypocrisy, synchronized disappearing acts, and speeches about trust made me realize that waiting even one more hour was basically letting them keep humiliating the people I loved right in front of our faces. I turned to Owen and said, I can't wait anymore. He looked at me, looked at Brooke, looked at Grant, and answered, then don't. I asked the DJ for the microphone. The poor guy handed it to me thinking I was going to make some sweet little thank you speech. Maybe a bouquet joke. Maybe a toast. The man had no idea he was handing me the murder weapon. I said something like, before the next speech, I'd like to thank two very special people for teaching me today about the importance of honesty in marriage. The room went quiet. That kind of silence that doesn't yet know whether it's about to turn into applause or legal action. I asked the slideshow guy to connect my phone to the screen. It was a wedding with a photo presentation setup. Very classy, very modern, very convenient when you need to destroy households in HD. Owen stood next to me. That matters, because if he had tried to stop me, maybe the story would have gone differently. But he stayed, standing, right next to me. Like a man who understood that if the bomb already existed, at least you could choose the direction. I showed the screenshots. Not all of them, obviously. I'm not the vice squad of emotional pornography. I showed enough. Names, dates, phrases, the message about my wedding being the perfect window, the message about nobody noticing, the message calling Brooke and Grant easy to distract. It was enough. The room exploded. Brooke froze. Not crying, not screaming, just frozen, like her body had taken a hit her brain hadn't even processed yet. Grant said no about 3 times, in that flat, dry tone people use when repetition is the last available form of denial. Daniel came toward me saying I was crazy, that it was out of context, that I was unstable. I always find it fascinating how people get caught red-handed and immediately sprint toward the out-of-context defense. Yes, Daniel, absolutely. In the context where you accidentally tripped and fell into your in-law's wife for 6 months. Elise tried to grab the microphone out of my hand and started crying. That offensive kind of crying, you know? Corporate crying. Lots of gestures, very few tears. Grant looked at her like he had just realized he married a toxic gas leak in heels. After that, honestly, it was just noise. Brooke screaming. My mother screaming at me. Owen's mother screaming at Elise. Owen's father trying to hold Daniel back. My aunt moving a chair away from the kids. My grandfather asking loudly whether someone had turned the air off. My nephew eating cake while watching the whole thing like it was live television. A beautiful scene for the family album. Daniel tried arguing that I had ruined his life. Owen shoved him and said he should be grateful he was still breathing inside the venue. Grant just took off his wedding ring, set it on the table, and walked out. Brooke went after him by instinct and then stopped halfway, turned around, took off her own ring, and threw it in Daniel's face. I will never forget the sound that metal made hitting his skin. It was a tiny sound. Emotionally it felt symphonic, The party ended right there, obviously. Half the guests left in shock. The other half stayed, pretending to help while collecting gossip the way people collect extra wedding favors to take home. The band packed up early. The photographer went pale, but kept shooting. Because a real professional is someone who will document the apocalypse if the contract covers it. The next morning, my phone had enough messages to start a cult. Half said I was brave. The other half said I had turned my wedding into a circus and humiliated families for revenge. My mom said I should have waited and told them in private. Brooke didn't speak to me. Daniel called me sick. Elise called me cruel, which is always delightful, because nothing delivers moral guidance quite like being lectured by people who were using someone else's ceremony as motel scheduling. Grant was the only person, besides Owen, who sent me a direct message, "Thank you for not letting me keep being the idiot in the room." But Brooke didn't see it that way at first. 2 days later, she called me crying and asked how I could have done that in front of everyone. I let her say everything, that I had humiliated her too, that I had made her find out in the worst possible way, that I had used her pain in the middle of my party. And honestly, I let her because she had every right to say it. I told her I was sorry about the way it happened, but not about the truth itself. And that when Daniel was up there giving a speech about loyalty, I realized waiting another hour basically meant letting him keep performing virtue in her face. She hung up on me. I didn't blame her. So that's the question. Was I the asshole for exposing the affair during my own reception and causing the divorces in the middle of my wedding instead of waiting and telling them privately? In the comments, someone wrote, "NTA, the affair caused the divorces, not you." But my God, this was a public execution. Someone else replied, "I was leaning ESH because of the timing." But honestly, after the speech about loyalty, I probably would have turned into a demon with waterproof mascara too. A third comment said, "The only thing that gets me is that you didn't tell Brooke and Grant before the ceremony. You chose preserving your party, and I don't know if that was fair." Ob replied, "I know. That's the part that eats at me the most. But I really thought I was preventing a collapse before the aisle. If I told them earlier, Brooke would lose her sister's ceremony and Grant would lose his brother's. And Daniel and Elise still would have hijacked everything. Maybe I was wrong. I just couldn't bring myself to hand them that much power." Another comment asked, "Why did you already have all the screenshots ready?" Ob replied, "Because men like Daniel only acknowledge gravity once the apple has already split their forehead open. Without proof, he would have sworn on his daughters, on God, on the wedding budget, on anything." One especially sharp comment said, "Your mother is mad at you because you were loud." Families tolerate cheating way more easily than they tolerate public embarrassment. It's depressing, but it's true. And that, by the way, is a brutal flash of truth. Some families will forgive adultery, fraud, lying, disappearing acts, stolen credit cards, even pyramid schemes. The one thing they will never forgive is somebody making the mess visible. Because for a lot of people, the sin isn't rotting. It's smelling bad for the neighbors. Later, Op came back with an update. It's been 9 days since the wedding, and things got worse before they got better. Grant filed for divorce the next day. Brooke filed 3 days later. So yes, the two divorces are real and they are happening for the first 4 days. Brooke barely spoke to me. She stayed with my parents with the girls. Daniel begged for forgiveness, swore it was a mistake, then swore it was never physical, then swore I had faked part of the messages, then circled back to it was just a phase. So he basically worked his way through the entire Coward's catalog on clearance. Grant called me because Elise told him everything between her and Daniel had been emotional, and that I'd exaggerated with selective screenshots. I told Grant if he wanted, I'd send absolutely everything. I sent it. It was not emotional. There were hotel reservations. There were photos. There were sex jokes. There were messages about using the late outfit change at the reception as a chance to meet up. There was everything. Brooke came to see me yesterday. She apologized for dumping her anger on me. She said she still hates the way she found out, but that now she understands I didn't make anything up and I didn't do it out of envy, cruelty, or drama. She also said something that broke me a little inside. She said the worst part wasn't seeing the messages. It was remembering Daniel's speech and realizing she applauded Grant is staying with a friend. He's calmer than I expected, which is honestly more terrifying. That kind of clinical calm people have when they've already passed the crying stage and entered spreadsheet mode. And that's when the story somehow got even filthier. The venue manager called me because after the chaos, they reviewed the internal security footage to figure out when security should have stepped in. In those recordings, they saw Daniel and Elise messing with the gift table while the guests were dancing. I went there with Owen to watch. They were not just making out in the hallway. They were stealing envelopes from my wedding. I'm not exaggerating. Daniel opened the card box, took several envelopes, and put them inside his suit garment bag. Elise stood watch. In another camera angle, the two of them are laughing in a service hallway right after. The manager found one of the envelopes dropped near the vendor exit, with cash still inside. 3 others were empty in the inside pocket of Daniel's jacket. When he returned the tux to the rental place called me because they found them and thought it was odd. When Brooke found out, something in her just died. I think up until that point, there was still a part of her trying to separate cheating husband from completely rotten human being, finding out that the man was cheating on her, using his sister-in-law's wedding as cover, and stealing the newlyweds' gifts. On top of that was the full deluxe package of human decay. Grant found, on Elise's laptop, a spreadsheet called Reset. The name already sounded like tired villain energy. In that spreadsheet, there was a budget for an apartment for the two of them, estimated legal costs, projected asset division after the divorces, and one line that said, "Wedding money helps first month." Yes, they literally planned to bankroll their little love nest with my wedding gift money. So, for the relatives who thought my great crime was ruining the atmosphere, I would just like to point out that the atmosphere was already ruined. I just pulled the tablecloth off it. My mother still insists I should have told them privately. And here comes the most disgusting part of this update. Yesterday, after a lot of crying and guilt, she admitted she had suspected something for months. In December, she saw Daniel and Elise standing much too close in the parking lot outside my aunt's house. Late at night, she said she had no proof, so she stayed quiet. Then in March, she saw Daniel's phone light up with messages from Elise's name and a heart emoji. Again, she stayed quiet. According to her, she didn't want to destroy the family's over-intuition. So she did what every sick family does when it finds rot on the floor. She threw a rug over it and called it prudence. Brooke stopped speaking to her to Daniel and Elise. By the way, moved in together for exactly 18 days. 18, I swear. It ended when Elise found out Daniel had been texting a co-worker during the divorce chaos. I would love to say I was surprised, but I was mostly impressed by the speed. The man barely stepped out of one affair and was already testing market expansion. So, to summarize, two divorces filed, a police report over the wedding gift money, my mother exposed as a silent coward, Brooke in therapy, Grant walking around like a traumatized federal auditor, and I am still getting messages from some cousins saying that, despite everything, I could have been more elegant. Maybe I could have. But elegant, in that moment, would have meant letting the parasites finish dessert, steal my envelopes, and then leave to consummate the rest of the evening in a hotel paid for, with everyone else's humiliation, and that I was not going to do. In the comments on the update, someone wrote, "My God, you didn't destroy the families. You stopped the selfish grifters from continuing operations." Someone else said, "The worst part for me is your mother knowing and caring more about the aesthetics of silence than the truth." And one especially perfect comment said, "Daniel and Elise weren't star-crossed lovers. They were two opportunists turned on by their own reflection. Once the secrecy ended, all that was left was organic trash trying to split rent." That is exactly what it was. I posted one last update, because apparently the universe decided the bride still had not been fully enrolled in the advanced seminar of human disillusionment. Final update, because I think I can finally breathe. Brooke went all the way through with the divorce and, during the process, found out Daniel had been siphoning money out of their joint account for almost a year. Not huge amounts, but consistently. Small payments, hotels, restaurants, gifts, gas. Enough to build a map of the affair. Grant found the same thing. Elise had also been hiding expenses and opened a credit card in her own name without telling him. From what I've heard, the lawyers for both divorces practically became friends because the material was so similar. Brooke and I are talking properly again. Not perfectly, because some wounds do not become scars in 30 days, but we're okay. She told me something I think is going to stay with me for a very long time. She said, "I wish I hadn't found out like that, but now I know that if you hadn't done it, I would still be defending him." Grant thanked me in person. He said he never wants to see Daniel or Elise in front of him again, and that, for the first time in months, he's sleeping without feeling like he's losing his mind. According to him, the last few times he confronted Elise about being emotionally distant, she made him feel paranoid. The classic package: cheat, lie, and outsource the insanity. Is for my wedding, which is what all of this should have been about from the beginning. Owen and I are okay. Weirdly okay. Better, actually. I think when you spend your wedding night watching hell open up in the reception hall, and the person beside you doesn't run, that creates a pretty specific bond. I do not recommend it as couples therapy, but apparently it works. The official wedding video is done. The editor, a tired saint, cut out the scream part and the screaming. So now we have a beautiful record of the ceremony, the vows, the dance. My grandmother almost tripping on my dress. And none of the part where the families imploded like the buffet came with the catastrophe clause. But in the raw audio, you can still hear my Aunt Linda whisper. Right before the cut, I knew that tramp fixed her hair too much. That is the real soundtrack of my family. So no, I don't think anymore that I caused the divorces. I just turned on the light in a room that already had too many roaches in it. Look, I understand the people who say the public exposure was extreme. It was, of course it was. That wasn't a confrontation, that was a guillotine with open bar. But let's stop treating the reaction like it was the original sin. The affair didn't begin when the projector came on. The theft didn't either. The lie was already there, sitting at the head table, dressed for the occasion, napkin in its lap. So, here's my verdict. Natalie gets 0.5 out of 5 assholes for choosing napalm mode in a room that still contained grandmothers, children, and lemon mousse. Daniel and Elise each get 5 out of 5 with bonus points for cheating, stealing, manipulating, and using someone else's wedding like a promotional package for degeneracy. Brooke and Grant get 0. The mother, honestly, gets about a 2 for premium grade cowardice wrapped in the language of good sense. And now I want to know what you think. Was she too cruel? Or did she just do the dirty work everyone else wanted to postpone? If you had the mic in one hand and the screenshots in the other, would you have waited until coffee? Or would you have unleashed the apocalypse right there?